Okay, taking up where we were a minute ago, if you don't have running water in your residence, there's another little thing you don't have that we take very much for granted, and that's a flush toilet. Okay, overcrowded, nothing like privacy indoors or out. What are you going to do? Well, what you have to do. People kept crock jars, and the word crock still has a certain connotation associated with it. And you keep it lidded to try to contain the smells. And when the time comes, you just hunker down on that and do what you have to do. What do you do when it gets full? How do you empty it out the window, either front or back? And since the streets are paved but they're not crowned, they're V'd because stuff flows down the middle of the street. The street functions as an open sewer with flies and all of that. So that's what you're doing. So when did we first get flush toilets? I'll come at it from this direction. We had a textbook not too long ago which had like a diagram of a floor of a dumbbell tenement. And in the middle, where it's inset, they had a room labeled WC. Now, that doesn't mean that Weatherford College had a branch campus there. WC in most of the English speaking world stands for water closet. That means a bathroom. So if you told somebody from the UK, for example, that you went to WC, they would draw a whole different meaning from that. So be careful about it. Okay. That was a late model one from later times. Most of the 19th century, no, if you were wealthy, you might have a bathroom like that. And that took surprisingly long to catch on. I told you about the Vanderbilts. Well, the Vanderbilt brothers had a 70-room cottage, as they called it, in Newport, Rhode Island. 70 rooms. Everything's extremely expensive. It's a show place, and they only lived there about 6 weeks out of the year. It had bathroom facilities for the residents. For the guests, I think there was one. You get that full of people, and there could be a line. Well, this one's too good to be true. But the first flush toilets, why am I even telling you this? A little bit later time. Not the man who invented them, and the key to it was the pipe that goes down under it. It goes up like that. It's like that prevents gases from coming back up. That was the problem for quite a while. Of course, you have to have running water. But the company that marketed these things took its name from the founder, and the founder's name was Thomas Crapper. So it said Crapper on there. So I don't know which word came first, to tell you the truth. Okay, I'm mangling this up. So you don't have that. You don't have ways to wash your hands. This waste disposal in the part of the city. There may be sewers in some parts of the city, but from the crowded parts, they're not. They don't really have garbage pickup, or at least not efficient garbage pickup. So you got trash and garbage all around. When they do pick it up, where are they going to put it? These are coastal cities. New York City and Boston, they'd put their garbage on big old barges and haul it out into the ocean and dump it. Boston is in from the seacoast some distance, and they just take it out in the harbor and dump it there. And eventually they reclaim some land. They dumped it so full it filled up, and there's dry land that they built where there used to be open water. Logan Airport in Boston is sitting on what was a very long in the building garbage heap. Okay. All right. I guess it's safe. They need to pay more attention to who gets on the airplanes. So you have that. You're sharing the space with with an animal population. As I say, there's no shortage of horses. Okay, delivery vehicles, hackneys such as that use horses. Wealthy people had stables attached to their houses. Middle class people could put up horses at public livery stables. If you needed one, you could rent a horse. Now, horses do produce pollution. Okay, if you're not clear on this, Picture the rodeo parade on Main Street in Weatherford going on 24/7, 365, and I think it will come clear to you. It's the kind of pollution you can step in. So that's just there all the time, and there are flies crawling around in it. They're flying in the window and crawling over your food and all of that. So disease spread is that's a problem too, a consequence of all this. Okay. The one problem that they did make progress with was transit, people getting around inside these tightly packed cities. So it comes in several stages. As far back as the 1840s, they started to have horse-drawn streetcars. You know what streetcars look like? They ran on rails through the city. You have a streetcar, and you climb on, pay your fare. It looks like a really, really old-fashioned bus pulled by a team of horses. So there's a lot of horses, right? At the high point, the street railway companies, and there were several of them, they were called traction companies, I think, at least later. They were employing something like 9,000 horses, each of which produced its share of pollution. Okay. By the 1870s at the latest, they're starting to run steam trains through the cities. Now, you don't have to think very long to figure out that steam locomotives and foot traffic don't mingle very well. Then and later, somebody went back and dug through the newspapers and figured out in New York City, an average of 2 people a day were killed by being run over by trains, just stepping off the street without looking. What they did was build trestles about 40 feet above street level, and the trains ran on those elevated tracks. The city of Chicago is still famous for them, but they're not pulled by coal-burning steam locomotives anymore. So most all the major northeastern cities had these elevated trains. You walk up to the platform and buy your ticket. When the train pulls in, you get on and go off to wherever it's going. And they didn't take these trestles down in New York City until about 1940. And in all of these cities, they're running on being pulled by coal-burning steam locomotives. They put out smoke and ash and cinders, and the cities had acquired this dull, gray, gritty, grimy sort of look. They still have elevated trestles in Philadelphia. I was there one time, and that was 1999, I think. And it looked like places where they'd shoot car chase movies under these trestles. I felt a little bit self-conscious. I'm driving a rather large van with Texas plates through that part of town and got away with it. Okay. Sometimes these commuter trains would jump the tracks. You don't want to be down below when a locomotive and the train it's pulling comes crashing down. That kind of thing could happen. Not all the time, but it could happen. Okay? The next option would be running the trains below the street level. That's what we call subways, and they're still very much in use, but you can't run steam locomotives down there because it's a tunnel. It'd fill up with smoke and you'd choke. So that only became available when it was possible to generate electricity and distribute it on a power grid. So basically they ran on electricity, and the pollution was generated at the point where the electricity itself would be generated. Okay. I'm told the first ones originated in London. They weren't running on electricity quite the same, not electric motors. Have you ever been through the bank drive-through? I'm sure you have. You put your deposit or whatever in this little tube, a little cylinder, and stick it over there and punch the button, and it goes vacuum powered into wherever they're going to, deal with it. I'm just barely old enough to remember, and this is when I'm a little kid. That's been a while. They used that in stores. That was before people had credit cards and that sort of thing, and they had pay stations all over the store, but the cashiers would be upstairs, and they would use little things about like that. They'd go up and they'd come back down with your change and all of that. So anyway, somebody in England got the idea that if you could build a really big one, it could carry people. And they tried it. It was crowded and slow, and you're sitting there kind of folded up in this cylindrical vehicle. But I'm told in London they still call their subways tubes. The term stuck. Okay, those are still very much in use. And then we have, of course, street level electric powered streetcars. The term applied to that was trolleys. Those were in very, very wide use. All the major cities, coast to coast, even moderate sized cities like Dallas and Fort Worth were for a long time. Moderate size. 70 years ago, Arlington, Texas had about 3,000 people. But as early as like 1907, they called it the Interurban. I think that was the company. You could ride electric powered trolley cars all over Dallas, all over Fort Worth, and back and forth in between, which was a ride out through the country with an occasional rural village. But the Interurban, it went on to flourish to the point where in the 1930s and in the 40s, when gasoline was rationed, you could take the Interurban as far north as Denton and as far south as Waco. And that lasted till it almost would intersect with the timeline of my life on this earth. Said World War II is over, gas not rationed anymore, people started driving cars again. The last Interurban rolled into Waco, Texas on January 1st, 1948. I wasn't quite here yet, but it was getting there. Okay. San Francisco is still famous for cars like that. So what that does is make it possible for the footprint of the city to expand. It doesn't need to be a walking city anymore. People can live beyond walking distance from their jobs and commute back and forth cheaply. Okay? So you don't have to have the whole workforce of some big dirty factory living within walking distance across the street from the block-sized mansion of somebody that's super rich. Anyway, keep an eye on the clock here. So the move to these suburbs began as far back, I believe, as maybe the 1870s. Surely it's in full swing by the 1890s, and it works its way down the social scale from top to bottom. As soon as people could afford to, they would abandon the inner city and move to some nice, clean, quiet, safe, secure suburb or a residential city on the edge of the major city. And sometimes the cities just got hollowed out. So nearly everybody moves out. So there are cities that are not that far from here where if you're out there in this downtown 4 in the morning, you're not going to meet anybody you want to meet. Fort Worth has seen a significant revival since the 1980s, where heavy old buildings, you couldn't afford to build buildings like that now. Commerce is gone, and they repurposed them as residential buildings for middle-class people. So people live downtown, they work downtown, they're within walking distance of entertainment, dining, such as that. But if you move out to the suburbs, no longer do you have to live within walking distance of your job, as long as you live within walking distance of the commuter train station. That's going to do it, except for immigration. And I'm going to cap this one off now. I can't think of anything else to throw on top of it. Oh, yeah, well, one more thing. Cities tended to be governed in a very corrupt manner. Cities from fairly early, throughout the 19th, well into the 20th century, there'd be some kind of almost like organized crime organization referred to as the machine. And the guy on top of the machine is the boss. Boss ruled. Dozens of cities had that. They functioned as kind of a rough out social service agency, because the way they stay in power is that their people keep getting elected. The boss, by the way, usually doesn't have an official position like mayor. He's just behind the scenes calling the shots. But they know where the new developments are going to be and all kinds of that sort of thing. They are taking illegal money left and right, hand over fist, and getting rich. But in order to stay in power, they have to be the best friend of the working class. So you got your local ward boss. If there's a wedding or a funeral in your family, he's going to be there. Baby christening, your brother-in-law gets to scrape with the law, you need a fixer to get him out, your ward boss will take care of it for you. So I have to stop this now, and we'll look at immigration.